Iron Age hill fort. And it was, it was very close. And
What, Glen Close?
I can't remember what it was called.
What?
In Cheshire.
That's right.
I suppose there's loads in Cheshire. But
What, Glen Close? Oh, you're
not
talking
really.
about Oswestry.
Yeah,
Oh, I've got,
ours
was it?
was good.
Well,
Did
well,
you
if
see
it was
it?
Oswestry, what?
Did anyone see it?
Well, I don't know.
You
No, I
don't,
didn't.
No,
Don't watch
No,
dates.
we don't
don't,
watch the crap
don't
that you
watch.
watch.
No.
We don't watch that type of rubbish.
It's only like it's for me, it's like looking at places. I'm just looking, they sometimes show some interesting things.
I
Uh,
prefer to look at those magazines with naked women, but that's something else.
like an Iron Age hill fort. But I'm not sure if it was really, because it looked more like a mound.
Yeah. Cool.
Like it could have been a
Yeah.
castle.
Um. Right. Hang on. Right. Let's crack on. Richard, any news from you this week?
no, nothing for me. Nothing of
Right.
interest
Okay.
anyway.
Do you know, I've got the weirdest bloody phone. The only one who can use my phone is me because it's got to look at me.
Oh, oh, it's got visual
It's got Face ID.
face ID. Yeah. Oh well.
Face ID. Right.
I'm
What
fed up
about
with
you,
all
Goff?
this. I'm fed up with all this
What?
ID.
Who? What? Really?
Nobody
I don't know.
phones me. Hardly ever phones me. And then if I get a voicemail and I forget the PIN number, they take that one away from me as well. I can't even hear it.
Anne, shut up. Goff is supposed to be talking. Anything from you, Goff?
No, I couldn't follow that.
I can't follow it
No,
either.
no news. No.
No. Do you know what? I'm eating Marmite toast on toast. Is absolutely. Do you know what? I absolutely hate the taste of Marmite, but I know it's too good for me, so I eat it. Anne,
Oh, that was it. The Iron Age hill fort, beginning with H in Cheshire.
should we go through a lot? Harry, Harold.
I'll have to look.
Look, Anne, it's fine. We know it's there. We know it exists. It's all right.
All right then. Yeah. All right. But apart from that, no, nothing. I
All
don't
right,
think.
Henry.
No, absolutely no news relevant to this.
You can't follow any of this, can you?
I did go to Cheshire with the archaeology Cymru. Oh, it was very good. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a good, yeah, good. And didn't you go to that naughty shop in Cardiff with me to get a blow up rubber doll?
No, it wasn't me. Was that Anne Holton?
Yeah, it was.
Oh my
Right.
God. She would have taken you probably in the
Oh
car.
yeah. It was so good to convince her that yeah, we won't go there. Right. I wanted to start off with mentioning this. I don't know if any of you listen to BBC Radio 4 plus, but it's there's a story that's been on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. I'm listening to today's. It's called "Meet Me at the Museum" by Anne Jungson, right? And it's about Paul Ritter, who plays the character Anders, and also Tamsin Gregg, who plays Tina. And they basically, Tina always wanted to see in Denmark the Tollen man body, right? And it's fascinating because it's talking about the Tollen man body in the context of what we used to think about it a few years ago. And one thing that struck a nerve with me was on Tuesday. Was it Tuesday? I don't know what day we are. Thursday? I don't know. Well, Monday. It was Monday. On Monday, they basically, it's basically a letter correspondence, and each of them are reading out the letter between the two of them and what they think about the Iron Age and stuff. And the curator of this Denmark museum was saying, in context of the letter, which would have been written quite a few years ago, he was saying that women in Britain were controlled by men in the Iron Age, and women. One woman was shared between X amount of Iron Age men and all the rest of it. And now we know that that's not true. However, it's interesting to hear this series because it's completely contradicting everything that I'm saying, and it's useful to know how our minds have changed. So if you're interested in that, it's BBC Radio 4 Plus. You can get it on iPlayer, and it's Meet Me at the Museum by Anne Youngson. Now, I was on set yesterday, and I thought, right, what I'm going to do is I'm going to prepare the lecture ready for Tuesday night. As soon as I come off set, within about 10 minutes, I was teaching last night, and I had everything ready. I was dead impressed with myself. But I was so impressed. I was so prepared for the lecture last night. I prepared over 70 images, which I only managed to get through about 50 last night. So we're going to see what we can do now. And we're going to go on to sharing. Sharing is caring, Anne, as you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's milk tray in it. Oh no.
No, Anne. It's not in the same context as when Goff is talking that you've got to share the conversation. You know what I mean? Never mind. Right. Okay, here we go. We're going to crack on. And I wanted to... last week I said about Iron Age field patterns and Iron Age farming and all the rest of it. And I was constantly comparing it with the medieval ridge and furrow system. And that's what we're going to do tonight. But we're going to try and compare the two quite contrastedly and see where we go with it. Now, some of the images that we start off with are aerial photographs by Historic England. Some of these were taken in a very dry summer in 2011. And this, as you can tell, is a very unusual Iron Age stroke Roman landscape. And one thing that I can remember saying last week about the Iron Age is that the Iron Age people divided their fields into small plots for farming purposes. And within that plot, for example, they would plant barley, they might plant some pulses, they might plant some herbs. But the big contrast is that in the medieval period in Britain, they had open fields. And that's an unusual contrast. Why is it in the Iron Age they're doing their best to enclose fields when in fact there's so much land around in the Iron Age that it's not really possessional? And in the medieval period, it is possessional. So why are they got open fields in the medieval period and they've got them enclosed in the Iron Age? And the answer is quite simple. This is what I've learned, very much so. Where I am in West Wales, what we've done, we've divided our main field into different plots. So the sheep graze one field one time, and then they graze another bit another time, and then we put them on the other field, and then we do this, right? We divide them around, but that's grazing animals, right? So to protect our trees, we've got barbed wire around them, we've got barriers around them, and all the rest of it. And that actually got me thinking. I thought, hang on a minute, what was there plenty of in the Iron Age? Sheep, goats, and cattle, and particularly sheep and goats. They see anything green, they eat it, whatever it is, even if it's going to kill them, they'll eat it, right? And this got me thinking. It really explains why we've got walls and ditches around Iron Age enclosures to protect the very, 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 very valuable crop. Because all you need is one goat into your field, and you've lost the entire supply of food for the next year, right? So this is very important to remember this, and it's not just building walls for the sake of it or ditches for the sake of it, because they didn't do that in the medieval period. In the main, they had open fields. So that's the point. So there's two contrasting differences between the Iron Age there and the medieval period and the ridge and furrow. Both were using the term ridge and furrow for the Iron Age, but we don't have many examples that I can show you tonight of Iron Age ridge and furrow, but enough medieval ridge and furrow, and they're contrastedly different. Right. So also, yes, I just remembered when I was listening to this little miniature series online, on BBC Radio 4 Plus, I was reminded to go to Warham Camp. So whilst we've got this image in front of us, let's just think it's very difficult to work out an Iron Age and a Roman settlement landscape. What have I just said? Surely the Roman landscape was very organized, and there was villas, and there were set fields, and there was this and that. Yes, there was. However, the Iron Age continued in Britain oblivious to what was going on with who ruled over Britain. It's a bit like God, I was just going to make an analogy of the Jewish population in Europe, which is a really bad analogy. It's a bit like having a gypsy population in Britain or the continent. They just carry around and they just do their own thing, oblivious who they got to pay taxes to and so on. That's very controversial in me saying that. But that's basically a metaphor for the Iron Age Iron Age Roman period. So lots of the fields and systems in the Iron Age continued. So what you might think is that little paddock there is for planting barley. These little ones might be for habitation. There might be roundhouses in some of these. You've got boundaries. You've got trackways. This very interesting feature here might be known as a banjo enclosure, where you've got stock going down here, holding, going into here, and being kept in here in what's called a fold. And we do see these features across the medieval Iron Age Roman landscape throughout time. The point to be made here is that this landscape is very complex. It doesn't represent one moment in time. It represents multiple moments in time, as we would think about the teachings of Tim Ingold, where we got various layers and the context of those layers. Very much in this image here. Is this right? The circular feature seen from the air is thought to be evidence of a Roman era roundhouse near St. Ive village in Cornwall. Well, that's quite a big bloody roundhouse. It's more like a circular.
Are you sure it's St. Ives in Cornwall, not in Cambridge?
No, St. Ive.
Yeah, in Cambridge.
It's got Cornwall there.
Where?
It says southwest England. Cambridge is in the southeast.
Oh, all right. All right.
So St. Ive. It's on the thing, Anne. There. The description. This is from historic England. They don't lie. But the point is, look at that very complex landscape. So it's trying to work out what is exactly going on. So in many ways, ditches, if we think about ditches as a context, 2 points here. The one point is that you might have a ditch to deal with drainage. You might need a ditch to allow, for example, crops to grow, but these are clearly not those types of features. But when you do think about that, you would think about the medieval ridge and furrow having a big tall ridge which is a metre tall, and you've got a ditch either side for drainage. Clay landscapes like the Cosmeston landscape in the Vale of Glamorgan, very clay, or places like Wick, for example, which can be very clay as well, and places like Bridgend. Newcastle Hill, for example, I've worked there, I've done archaeological work there, and obviously when you look towards the Boverton in the Vale of Glamorgan, that's very clay as well. And St. Athan, lots of places are. But one thing to think about when we're trying to examine prehistoric landscapes and then heading into Roman landscapes is what creates the staining, the marks in the landscape. So these are classed as these aerial photography has managed to get these marks in a field. And what happens is that the green there, the dark green itself, that's just about to be harvested. So that's sort of early August. There's a couple of weeks before harvest, but not too far away. So the green there is because the nutrients are still being drawn up, and the phosphates are still being drawn up into the plants. Because it's growing higher, it's growing lusher and higher. And then as soon as the farmer sees that green patch is gone, that's ready to harvest. Jeremy Clarkson, eat your heart out. So, so what we've got there, we've got a very complex landscape. Going back to what I said earlier on, the Iron Age continues. What you might be looking at is several hundreds of years of occupation here. And what you can clearly see is that I'm just going with just an idea here. So what you might have, for example, let's do red. You've got a roundhouse there. Okay, you've got maybe an indication of a roundhouse there. And what you do find is the specific parcels of land in regards to what you're seeing there. So this may have gone all the way over there. These parcels of land, various different stages of history. And again, and when you do excavate the archaeological landscape, unless you've got specific dates in these ditches from pottery, and actually the pottery might be very old before it goes into the ditch, so it's really difficult to work out dates from that context, muck spreading and so on. So somebody said to me, I've actually found something in the past few days, and I've done stuff on YouTube and TikTok, and people have been really into it, and it was a thing of basically what I did. I haven't got the images on here, but what I did, I basically, near me, there's a weird bit of land alongside the road, and I was basically, my first TikTok YouTube video, people were saying, oh right, is a drainage ditch, is it this, is it that? Very few people were actually coming up with the answer, because I didn't really know the answer. The next day I put another video on, and I basically said, I'm not really sure what's going on. And then some people said, what about this being a really old trackway? Because you said on one side of this sort of little gully, there's a couple of trees which are over 100 years old. On the other side, there's a couple of trees. Why can't it be a little trackway? And I just thought, bingo, it's a little trackway. And then somebody suggested, one of my keen followers on the likes of YouTube, he said to me, well, why didn't you put a little trench across it? And I thought, I would love to put a little bit of a trench across it. One, I don't have the people. One, I don't have the time. One, I don't have the money. One, I don't have the personnel. And secondly, even if I did put a trench across it, it's very unlikely that I'd be able to get dating evidence anyway. And I'd have to partially destroy the monument to try and really work out what's going on. So I decided not to go for that option at all. So anyway, so it's very difficult to work out what's going on. And also Emma, who's online, who's in the other class, who wanted to meet you in Chepstow, Anne, alongside Judith. She said, Anne will get on with my dad. He's completely useless at tech stuff too. So there you go. You've got a fellow friend there, Anne. So what you've got here, I think what I did last night, I basically said, find the roundhouse, right? And you can actually find the roundhouse quite quickly here. There's the roundhouse in the middle. You can just see the curve, right? And what's happening, it's likely that there's some nettles, those little green bobs of nettles, or there's something within the crop system, right? And really interesting enough, the ditch here is completely identifying the earlier structure or the earlier landscape within this site that we're looking at in Dorset, for example, and Iron Age settlement. And what you're talking about a corral bit here where you've got a little bit of a neck into more of a controlled landscape in front, where you've got like this wave effect. Is this a sort of controlled field area, or in fact maybe that's where they may have lived? Hang on, not that. That's where they may have lived down there. And these might be earlier structures. It's really difficult to work out what's going on and trying to get a sense of the perspective within the landscape. We're not talking about aerial photography. We're not talking about crop marks or parch marks. Parch marks are basically the same as crop marks, but parch marks are basically when you've just got grass. Crop marks is when you've got growing crops. But look at that. So what we've got aerial photography identifying the Iron Age landscape as well, and the sort of these features within the Iron Age landscape. I can remember in 2014, the big part of Somerset and Cambridgeshire flooded. Can you remember it on the news? It was quite devastating. And there were little farms with polder dikes around them in the middle of Somerset and Cambridgeshire, and there were just huge wafts of water coming through. And in those moments, we were able to identify bits of archaeology within the landscape, like this. So it's identifying archaeology by water. Whatever this is this a bit like Warham Camp, which we're going to go on to very soon. And again, they talk about Warham Camp in this wonderful little BBC dramatized series. Again, remind you about that. Meet Me at the Museum by Anne Youngson. So again, look at this really, really complex raison d'etre of a landscape. Look how really complex this is, and how archaeologists might approach this, and how archaeologists might not approach this. Because again, it is really, really complex. And where is the Iron Age landscape, and where is the Roman landscape? There might actually be even medieval features in there as well. So again, thanks to Historic England, and we're looking at that. Look how complex that is. We got, and again, it goes to show what I've said about the difference between the medieval landscape and the ridge and furrow being an open landscape. Let's before we do any more about this, let's just remind us of a medieval landscape. Let's just remind us. 1, 2, 3. That's a medieval landscape. See, you might get the modern field boundaries now based on the medieval landscape, but back in the medieval period, it was all open like this. It was just all fields with ridges and furrows all over the shop. But this is what the medieval landscape is like. So when we think about a very much controlled, a controlled landscape, which is back to here. What we've got to remind ourselves, and obviously from Bedfordshire as well, a nice little overall. You can see this is the way they did things in the Iron Age, without any doubt at all. This is how they're organising the world in the Iron Age stroke Roman period. And I'm thinking that we've got to remember that it's very, very intense. To think about, for example, this landscape being very intense. These people had to collect stones. These people had to dig up the earth to create the banks. They had to cut down trees to create palisades to keep the animals out. The point is if you really value something, you're going to protect it, and that's it. There's no more discussion, right? Okay, medieval world. So what you're saying, Karl, is that in the medieval world, they didn't have any sheep wandering across Britain. Well, the sheep that they did have in Britain were controlled by the monks and rich landowners and deer parks and all the rest of it, which had the sort of various stockades and everything to stop the animals getting out. So it's only after the Black Death in the medieval period that we are then talking about people being replaced by sheep. In fact, people are being replaced by sheep because they're dead. Wages went up after the Black Death because there were very few people around. It's on my side of the pool, out of the 7 million people after the Black Death in 1351, 1352, and it kept reoccurring every single year, actually. The population was reduced to just over 2 million. So people are replaced by sheep. Right, so they then graze across the old open landscape that was then now afforded to by an open landscape left by the former ridge and furrow medieval antics, which were no longer being done because there weren't people to farm the landscape. But when we go back to the Iron Age again, and when we look at the Iron Age, when we look at 2,200 years ago, 2,000 years ago, this landscape itself is what they're protecting. They're protecting what they've got. They're not protecting what they've got from other people, because those other people can go over there, right, or over there, right. There's remember, the population of Iron Age Britain really isn't going to reach 3 million until the Romans get here. It's really not going to get there. So we've got a big world that people are doing things. But what they've got is very, very special, very, very precious. And the worst thing you want is a sheep to get in there. I've planted a whole hedge, right, and and one of our sheep has got out, and we lost 200 trees, just like that, gone. So I understand what these, because the sheep, the ram got out. He ate a lot. The entire hedgerow, which was paid for by the wooden trust, was wiped out by one grazing sheep. So you can get an idea that, and that was a lot of work. Some of them come back, not all of them. Most of them were dead forever. So the point is that, looking from my point of view to the past, this is what they're trying to protect. This is what they're trying to keep safe. So what we're going to do, we're going to go away from ridge and furrows for a little bit. And were you going to say something, Anne?
I was just looking. It's Edisbury. There's a Iron Age hill fort at Edisbury in Cheshire and Helsby Hill.
That's the one you went to then.
There must have been Helsby Hill, yeah.
It must have been Halsbury Hill.
Yeah.
You're a hell of a woman, Anne. You went to Halsbury Hill. So what we're going to do, I thought I would just jump into something else. I wanted to. Oh yeah, and a silly sod last night. They said, oh, I thought I was getting to the end of bloody the Iron Age, and then somebody said, Carl, do charcoal burning. I thought, oh, thanks a lot. We got so much to do still in the Iron Age, darlings. We really have. And I just thought maybe what I'm going to do is link in being inspired by this Warham camp. And again, it's a circular camp. And what it is, there's a river taking up a big chunk of the camp. This is the river along the bottom. There's a roaded part of the camp. Somebody basically said last night, Carl, how do you know the river wasn't there in the Iron Age 2,000 years ago? And well, I basically said what they've done. They followed the river as it's migrated across the landscape. So the river would have been originally there. Before that, it would have originally been there. What it's doing is advancing forward like a military formation. So since the Iron Age, we've lost probably about 10% of this Iron Age hill fort. And one thing that I made a lot of mumping about last night was basically saying to people, the reason why it's called a fort is because start again. Lots of antiquarians used to refer to everything in Britain as Roman. So everything was Roman, even Stonehenge. Because it was like the thing to do. It was sexy to call everything Roman. But then we worked out that these things were built well before the Romans, 100 years, 200, 300 years before the Romans. So Warham Camp itself is all the way up in Norfolk, right? And it's Anne, you mentioned a couple of hill forts in Chester then, and across Britain. I thought you were going to do all the hill forts in Chester then. I thought, oh my God, we've got 100 to go. But the fact of the matter is we got 5,000 hill forts in Britain, but the ones in Norfolk, we've only got about 6. Big area, Norfolk,
I'm
the
going
area
to Norfolk in June.
Good. We'll
Check
give you a
them
medal
out.
for that.
To check them out.
We're basically, you're going to check these out. Warham Camp, you need to go there. It's a nice little site. And the one thing about Warham Camp itself is that it's actually not on a hill, like the other six in Norfolk. It's actually on the flat.
Yeah.
This is the thing. This is the thing. Why we talk about hill. This is an intriguing hill fort, by the way. It's very different than any of the others that we've looked at. And I'm not going to give away what's different about this until the very, very end, right? So the point is that this is intriguing. This could be associated with the Iceni Queen Boudica. So in rural North Norfolk, where green farmland falls away towards the coast, imposing twin earthworks rise from the grass to form an impressive circuit of concentric Iron Age banks and ditches. But it doesn't command the landscape. It's basically on the flat. It's famously flat landscape of East Anglia. Warham Camp lies only 15 meters above sea level. 15 meters. Joyous moments, can we think? All things being relative, however, the site, which is near Wells next to the sea, there's a great title, Wells next to the sea, about 35 miles northwest of Norwich, does occupy a fittingly defensive vantage point with sweeping views across its surroundings. So in a way, it's on the flat, but you've got you raise up the banks a little bit and you can see the whole landscape. So basically, think about a flat plane and you've got something sticking up. And even though you're on the flat, you can see the whole landscape. So this is what we're talking about. So you've got a truncated history with this site. And when this was built, how this was built, is it associated with Boudica? It's difficult to pin down the provenance of the site. And in fact, as sites go, as sites go in investigating an Iron Age enigma, right? As sites go, there is definitely a huge enigma here. I'm not giving it away yet. On the left hand side of the riverbank, that's sort of various work to understand various early channels, and just think, and there's the original river system, that black line there it is. And what they've done, they've dug these holes in the ground to try and work out how the river systems moved. I think that's absolutely fascinating. That now, again, what we've got, we've got archaeologists. They've dug over 20 trenches across the site, so it's known as a multivalent site. It's got an outer escarpment. They've got a ditch, and then inner bank, ditch, an inner escarpment itself. And then this again, one of only 6 in Norfolk. Again, just think, 5,000 of these sites across Britain, and there's very few in Norfolk. It's a really big county. Is that because just postulate here a minute? Is that because the population of Norfolk was small? No. What did they need? What did they need these sites for in Norfolk? Slightly different from what they needed these sites for in other parts of the Britain, and they didn't really need many of them.
I
They
know
didn't
you
need
don't want
many
me
of
to
these at
speak.
all. What?
I know you don't want me to speak, but
Go on, Anne, quick.
you just
I'm on the
remind me
flow.
of the ring forts in Ireland, but of course they're not, are they?
Oh, the Pixie Ring forts in Ireland, yes.
But that's probably because they've got land. Oh, I don't know. They haven't got a lot of land really in the
Anne,
Mediterranean.
you're right. Right, you're right, Anne. There is a parallel with Ireland, right? And Anne, whatever you do, right, don't be drawn into the Pixie Fairy hill forts of Ireland,
No,
right? Because
no.
if it's at night, right, and it's hazy, right, you might be seduced by the devil and you'll end up coming away pregnant.
Oh,
So that's shut Anne up. I knew I could do something there. Right. So what we've got, this is a truncated world, and the river itself is known as the River Stookie. Nice, isn't it? It's actually called Stiffkey, but they call it the Stookie. So today the monument's interior appears as a sea of empty grass. But over the course of the last 90 years, archaeologists have been striving to shed light on how the site evolved and how it may have been used. So previous investigations led by Harold St. George Grey in 1914. And guess who visited the archaeological excavations in 1914? A person that I keep mentioning every single week.
him.
Oh, come on, mention him. He's my relative. Lloyd George visited the excavations in 1914. He was invited by Harold St. George Gay. I kid you not, Anne. Lloyd George.
Looking for ideas.
And also excavated in so the original excavation of Harold St. George Gray in 1914, probably worked before that. And somebody by the wonderful name Rainbird Clark. Imagine having a name like that, and Rainbird Clark excavated the site in 1959. So what they revealed was the fact that the banks themselves, they got all the evidence. So they did sections across the likes of the banking, and then they realized that the banking itself held up a timber palisade, possibly a wooden platform at the rear. So these excavations produced sherds of pottery attesting to Iron Age and Roman activity taking place within its bounds. Further fragments have been recovered as stray finds in more recent years after being brought to light not by archaeologists. And this is another thing. This is why I was fascinated by this. I had to check out the research on this. I had to check out the research on this BBC radio program, because I thought, right, hang on a minute. On the BBC radio program, it basically said about this site. Meet me at the museum by Anne Youngson. It basically mentioned that in letters, in Tina's letters to the curator of the museum in Denmark, the Denmark curator writes back and he basically says, "Oh, the most artifacts that have been found here have been found by moles and have been found by badgers." And I just thought, is this for real? And it is. Even in my notes, it says more archaeology has been found at this site thanks to the resident moles and rabbits. It's amazing. And in fact, my pride of joy when I went to Kaya went when I was about 10 or 11. I went and looked in a molehill at where the oh god where the Motte and Bailey is at Kai Went, and I found a beautiful fragment of Samian ware bowl. I've still got that today. So
Yeah.
do I say this? With all this that we know about the site, up until recent work, the activities at the site remain obscure. Right. So what they did, they've got all these trenches across the site, right? And it is a scheduled ancient monument. So what they did, they organized the site and they organized at least 21 test pits in the interior. And you've got a small number alongside the riverbank. And I think they've got a small number alongside the riverbank to see how the erosion's affecting the site and so on. But this plan itself shows the locations of the present project's trenches. 21 test pits were opened at Warham Camp's interior, while the excavation also explored areas of its surrounding ditches. And I actually think this is absolutely fascinating because usually, the Secretary of State does not offer this level of archaeological excavation at any site, but this isn't nonsense Cadw that's responsible for this. This is the likes of Heritage England. So they thought, something can be learned. So they decided to grant permission for the work to be done across the site, and we've got a better idea what's going on at the site. And the work was actually done, wait for it, by the University of East Anglia Sainsbury's Institute for the Study of Japanese Art and Culture. Don't ask. I don't want to go there. And Cambridge Archaeological Units, they got a professional team, and work itself, the work itself was actually done not last year, but the year before. And so what they've done is this was to really understand the site. Right. And I think they got the Japanese arts and culture involved because there was money in this. So like when I say every, like most of these hill forts across Britain, what we really started to find, there they are excavated. What they really started to find was that there's evidence of Neolithic activity there. So obviously the site would have probably started off as a causewayed enclosure with the banks and ditches and all the evidence, and maybe this was a henge site. It was typically a Neolithic henge site, right? So it may have started off a causewayed enclosure, the string of sausages, a ditch and a bank, a ditch and a bank, and all the rest of it. And then what happened is that it ended up a little bit like Stonehenge. They decided to put a bank and a ditch around it. So the work there must have been undertaken over thousands and thousands of years. And this is the point. Lots of the prehistoric world, and there's a big point to be made in a moment, right? Lots of the prehistoric world is in development over a long period of time. And lo and behold, the Romans come along and lots of these hill forts are abandoned. Except they're used for farming activity in some cases, and maybe this is one of those cases. So again, some of the young volunteers involved in the project sorry, Anne, I'm just on the flow. Since the excavation of Warham Camp, 4 of the college participants, there we go. It's inspired them to do archaeology. So what they've got professional archaeologists on there, and then what they've got is that they've gotten some really sound results. So this is a good point to be mentioned here. So careful planning as Warham Camp is not only a scheduled ancient monument, but also a site of special scientific interest. And they have to be very careful when to excavate because it's the breeding ground for the chalk-hill blue butterfly, which is very rare. So, in other words, when you're doing archaeological work, you've got to really, really make sure that you get things right. So, there is one thing that I need to say, right? And this is the danger of archaeology, right? If you notice, right, if you notice over on the right there, top of the screen and below, um, we've got to be very careful when we work on these sites because um, damage was caused by earlier exploration. And basically what they did was they put a trench through the banks to actually read them. They didn't actually put it back the way it was. So it's scarred. The archaeologists have scarred it from previous generations. So what they wanted to do this time was to make sure that they don't do any long-term damage. They want to do these test pits across the site. And the thing is, it's idiot-proof because they're only doing a sample. And obviously future science, there's going to be 95% of the site left to examine. So these trenches are probably taken just under 5% of the site when they're excavating. And lots of damage has been caused to the site as well. There's been some bits around the edges by the stream, and maybe one bits that I've pointed out may be damaged by archaeologists were damaged in the 1700s. So what they really wanted to do is to try and understand the site to sort of give us an idea of dating. So as we go through the images, what we've got is down by the side of the riverbank. In some of these lesser trenches, for example, 22 all the way down to 25, not up on the top part of the site, the 19s and 21s. So what they've got is, as they were excavating, it basically says the excavation took place in July. Digging conditions were challenging, wet due to the inclement weather and the local water table. The one point with this is as they're excavating a former ditch, I mentioned this last night, as they're excavating a former ditch, even with the river in the Iron Age a little bit further away, right, it's likely that the ditches would have been filled with water at all times of the year, which, to be honest with you, is the Valhalla of all archaeologists wanted to look at an Iron Age hill fort, thinking that the ditches are filled with water, or even if it's a Motte and Bailey castle, there's water in it, obviously, or there's always water around a castle. No, there's not, but in this case, there is. Right, so this is the Valhalla of hill forts. This is everything that an archaeologist dreams of. Water in a ditch. So again, you can see the layers there. You can see nice dark organic layer for sampling there. A bit gritty below that. You've got gritty above the dark organic layer. So nice sort of shales and some nice sort of darker material there. Bit of burnt material as well. So what is all this about? Is this showing you some stuff? Is this showing you some really interesting archaeology that we don't latter to understand? So what they have done is they've done their LiDAR, they've done their geophysics across the site to try and really work something out. And this is one of the trenches dug in the ditches of the fort. So obviously down by the riverside, there's a little bit of water in there. Uncovered the base of a strange feature and recovered invaluable organic samples from radiocarbon dating. What this strange feature is, I don't know, because this stuff is so new. And this is the pièce de résistance, right? So the pièce de résistance is, if we, hang on, we've got all that, repeating myself. Oh, let's try and let's go back again. Let's get one of those nice aerial views. The pièce de résistance of this site is on the rather drier ground of the fort's interior. Contents of all the test pits were carefully sieved and recorded. And the bulk of finds recovered in this way was surprisingly dated. Not to the Iron Age, but to the later Roman period, reflecting coins dating from the 200s and the 300s, including a gold-plated statue of Lloyd George, hobnails from boots, and 12 Roman coins, as well as pottery, which could have been lost by casual or more purposeful visitors to the site. Now, that's a really nice point. That's a really nice point, because this would have been a really weird thing in the Roman period. It's not like their usual hill forts that they would have come across. It's perfectly circular. It's symmetrically perfect. It's beautiful, right? You know, even the Romans visited Stonehenge. When the Romans were visiting Stonehenge, the stones had been at Stonehenge for some of them had been there for nearly 3,000 years when the Romans saw Stonehenge. Think about it. Stonehenge was ancient beyond belief when the Romans saw it. So when we got add 2,000 years on, it's even more ancient. And the Romans would have, we know that the Romans would have visited these places. We've also got Salisbury Hill. It's not Salisbury Hill, Silbury Hill. And we think that the Romans visited that as a tourist attraction as well, from all the evidence. So we find bits and pieces there. And what they did find as well that might actually be linked directly with the Iron Age is that they found evidence of hammer scale, basically a little bits of fragments of iron that have been hammered off in the Neolith process on an anvil. And the point is what's going on? Is this associated with Iceni activity from the Iron Age? Now, the Iron Age monument had taken on a role of a blacksmith's forge setting within the bounds of what you've got there, but that was in the Iron Age. Why the Romans are there is probably maybe it was a farm landscape or a curious what's going on there. Maybe they thought the Romans thought this was the burial place of Boudicca. I was going to say King Arthur, but that's just ridiculous. Maybe the Romans thought this was the burial place of the likes of Boudicca, and that's why they went there. And this is why they found coins, and maybe the coins were votive offerings. But this is really interesting, right? This is really, really interesting as we move to some of the other images. A really interesting point is that there was not a single sign of a post hole. There's no single sign of a single building. Blacksmithing working stuff, but they haven't really found the furnace for that either. So no sign of a permanent structure associated has been found at the site. Indeed, no trace of any building, pit, or other dug feature that they found at the site. So magnetometry survey of the fort's interior also found no clear signs of anything. What they did find was evidence of farming, right? Now, how weird is that? Listen to this. So they found an enigmatic fan of striations. So what we're talking about that is, you know, where for example, you've got a fan and it's like that, and it's like that. So what they've done is they found evidence, for example, slightly in the ground of just gentle things like this, like across the horizontal surface. Hang on. Are we actually saying that the Iron Age people built this whole thing for farming? We don't we don't really know. These are actually visible in aerial photographs. Or is it more likely if this isn't evidence of Iron Age ridge and furrow farming, more probably it might be evidence of medieval ridge and furrow. But there's one problem with no pottery here either to date anything going on here in the medieval period. So this site is a huge enigma. We really don't understand it. We really don't understand what's going on with the site. And it got to the state that when they were excavating there, they excavated absolutely everything. Right? They sifted everything. Now, archaeologists who sieve their soil are people that usually find everything on an archaeological site. And I'll give you an example of this in a moment. When good old Mary was excavating with me at St. Bride's, we actually had a rocker sieve. So we had somebody make a frame and a little rocker, and you know, we had a rocker sieve on site. No idea what happened to that. However, we used to sift everything on the site, and the one thing is that one day we had a visit from metal detecting enthusiasts, and the metal detecting enthusiast said, "Can we metal detect on an archaeological site?" And my answer was a big no. But then I thought they all said, "Oh, why don't we metal detect your spoil heap?" Right? I.e., this is the big I am archaeologist who never loses anything on an archaeological excavation. We're gonna metal detect on your spoil heap, right? Um, they weren't sure whether we'd sifted all the soil, but we had. And do you know what? They didn't find a single artifact. That's
Oh,
how good an archaeologist I am.
yeah.
So in other words, we and I don't see the need for metal detectorists. If an archaeologist use a metal detectorist, they're not actually very good at archaeology. That's my perspective. Nothing was found in our sifted soil because we found everything. And so pleased to see that this team is doing the same thing. They didn't need metal detecting to use us either. They were so professional, Cambridge Archaeology, that they found everything also. Now, I gotta be honest with you, it's bloody hard sifting all that soil. Flipping heck, it really is. It's like you know, you can't do it when it's winter. You've got to do it when it's summer. And you've got to break up all your sods. Oh God, nightmare. So
Yeah.
Iron Age structures were conspicuous. Iron Age structures were conspicuous by their absence completely. There's no Iron Age structures here at all. It's almost as if, what is it? And there's no evidence of standing stones from the Neolithic period either. So it's just like one of those places. It's almost as if it's the epitome of an empty room. I was I've still got an acting counsellor that I speak to once a week. I remember saying to her, my idea of Valhalla is a completely empty room with a pillow in the middle, with nothing on the walls, and a laptop, and I can do whatever I like. With a nice cup of tea there and some a plate of assorted crisps and stuff. That's my Valhalla. And this sounds like the Valhalla of history because there's nothing there. There's absolutely, but there's probably spirits and everything else on this site. So, although the fort must have taken considerable effort to build, none of the test pits produced any evidence of permanent or even significant occupation from either the Roman period, the Iron Age, from the medieval period. It's amazing. I'm loving it. It really kicks archaeologists in the teeth, and I love it when that happens. So, and actually, do you know what I need to do is go back looking at that series that I'm listening to on the radio, and I'm wondering if in Tina's letters um to the curator in the Denmark Museum, Anders, whether she said that she was told by an archaeologist on site that people live there. I've got to go back, and if they say that people did live there on this BBC thing, that's what they used to think in the past, but that's not what they think now because the archaeological evidence tell us something completely different, as we were already explaining. So, while many other southern hill forts like Maiden Castle, Danebury, we've done Danebury, we're loving that. Peppered with the remains of roundhouses and other features, big storage pits, four-poster structures for storing grain and so on, hinting at more established variety of stuff that's going on at these sites. Warren Camp's interior remains a curiously sterile, hugely sterile. And to be honest with you, if we postulate now on that, it would really be silly. So I don't think we want to postulate on that because why shouldn't it have been sterile? That type of thing. What we've got is bits of pottery, but no occupation, nobody living there. So like the Roman finds, all of the Iron Age material recovered by the team has come from the topsoil rather than any features cut into the chalk. So in other words, chalk retains features quite well, right? So obviously, let's be really nerdish. The natural color of chalk is white, and if you dig through the chalk, it's going to be a different color, right? It's all white. They go down to they go down to the level of the chalk, the regolith we'd call it, and it's just chalk. That's it. And these items are even fewer in number, comprising fragments of pottery and a decorative button and loop toggle, and that's it. A loop toggle is basically for a big sort of um, cape of some description. Maybe that's Iron Age. This latter find is potentially significant. However, it is adorned with coral in a way reminiscent of some of the grave goods from Wet Wang's Middle Iron Age chariot burials. So our the most significant find there is coral that's from the Mediterranean, and that's it. And it's odd. It actually it's my idea of bliss. It really is. It's like producing an archaeological report. In that hole in the ground, there's nothing. In that hole in the ground, there's some pottery. In that hole in the ground, there's a coin. That's it. Next. I've done an excavation like that when I was the archaeologist on a desktop survey, not a desktop survey, a field evaluation at Pyle. I said to the developer, right, we're going to dig 15 boxes across the site with a digger. There's going to be me on site. I'll examine each of the holes. Nothing. I didn't find a single piece of pottery across the entire site. Nothing. No features. No nothing. And the Archaeological Trust didn't like my report because I didn't do enough holes. Because I didn't find anything in the 15, I should have done more holes and found something. That's my idea of bliss. So when we find back to this coral little find, this sort of coral sort of toggle find, they're talking about this is similar to the Wet Wang Slack burial site in Yorkshire, and obviously, you know, could it be to do with burial? We don't know. Woman's brooch, we don't know. So that's Warham Camp. I just wanted to chuck that in there because it was just so odd. It was really odd to be looking at something like this. And there's a little bit of a sketch of people working on site. Trench 21 in 2023. And there you go. July excavations. It would have been quite warm that year. So again, aerial view of the site, just getting a nice idea. And I'm reminded as well tonight that I've got to pick Michelle up from work, and I've got 50 odd minutes to travel. So, and I've got to pick her up at 10. So I'm going to really have to try that. We'll finish talking at 9 o'clock and we will do some questions and then we'll call it a day. Oh, yes. I did this last night. I thought, hang on, just have a quick look at something. Yeah, there we go. And we did that. And then we had a break last night. I've had this on my computer for ages. I was going to do a whole class on Iron Age ancient toys, and I think we did bits along the way. So I thought, right, okay, but I've had this on my device for quite some time, and I just thought, right, okay, okay, I'm going to delete this off my device, but I'm going to share this with you tonight. So after the break, we're going to be looking at some fields and soils and some landscapes in Scotland. But there we go. It is often easy to forget that the characters we read about in the Bible, for example, and in the history books were real people and lived much like we do today. Even the children of the ancient world loved to play and had toys like this wheeled bear, an otter at the bottom from the early Iron Age. So we're talking about 1,000 years before the birth of Christ, at a site known as Bayat Shemesh, as well as dolls made of clay and bone and board games with dice. And again, look at that dice there. Little board game there, little sort of tally board game, dice there, dice from 3,000 years ago, 1,000 years before the birth of Christ. There's an otter. Now you'll notice that they're wooden wheels, right? Now this is rather interesting because this reminds me of some finds that were found. They found some dolls, not dolls. They found some little toys like this, an Incan burial site with wheels. But we're always told that the Incans didn't have wheels, but the toys have wheels. And you're thinking there's something not quite right here. But just because you know about wheels doesn't mean to say you're going to use them. You're not going to use wheels on the 20,000 miles worth of trackways that the Incas got when you can quite easily use alpacas and llamas. Now, what this is postulated that they are circular and they are wooden wheels like this. just like we would have had toys back in the 1920s and the 1930s and the 1940s like this, and even still today. So again, I wanted to share this with you and to sort of give you another little perspective on the Iron Age, but from another world, from, for example, the Middle East. And there's Rusty the dog. I wanted you to remind you that I think we did the Iron Age and Rusty the dog about a year ago. And as I'm deleting the images of Rusty the dog off my computer, I thought, let's have a little look at Rusty the dog before he goes from my computer, because it's been a long time since we've been doing the Iron Age. We're not over yet. So, and then finally, what we've got there is what we're going to do after the break. So again, this idea of ridge and furrows. So the context of a medieval ridge and furrow, open landscape, the context of an Iron Age ridge and furrow within an enclosed field. However, there's indications in Scotland that they actually had in the Iron Age some open ridge and furrow landscapes, simply because there weren't many sheepies wandering around and goatees wandering around. I remember I had a conversation. I'm relaxed in my little chair telling you this conversation. I had a little conversation with my old lecturer, Simon Clark, University of Highlands. And I said to him, look, Simon, you've been really good to us. I'm going to send you a tree in the post. And he said, is that a good idea? And I said, yeah, it is. So I sent him a holly bush. And he said, the holly bush is thankfully survived, because if I put the holly bush out in the field, it would have been grazed upon by the goats and sheep. And the reason why Shetland and Orkney doesn't have many trees is not because trees don't grow there, it's because of the sheep and the goats. They see a little bit of green, it's gone, right? Or the bark on it is gone. So, and farming is still very important to Shetland and Orkney for the population in Orkney, which is about 21,000. And they need their sheeps. Anyway, I just wanted to talk about this quickly. That what we've clearly got is, you can clearly see the original soil surface, and this is what we can sort of see today. You know, we can still see the little bit of a ridge, not really the ditch, or we can see the ditch quite clearly, as we see with the examples at Warren Percy, which is up in the Midlands part of Britain. But the one thing I will just it's near York, actually, on the way to York. So what we got is, if we want to think about a ridge and furrow, it would go all the way up here, all the way up here, right? So these were sometimes a meter in height, these ridge and furrows. It used an immense amount of manpower to create the medieval ridge and furrows. So actually, that's equated to putting the walls and banks and ditches around stuff in the Iron Age. That's a lot of effort to create the ridge and furrows. That's a lot of effort as well. And I can tell you now, right, if somebody said to ridge and furrow my field here, right, it would probably take 10 of us, I don't know, several weeks to just do a very small field. It would be massively, intensely laboured, and I'd much prefer to build a wall, to be honest with you, rather than digging into the ground, the earth, to create this. So basically, that gives you a good idea about the ridge and furrows we go on, and that's what we're going to do after the break. So I tell you what, we're going to have a shorter break today. Sorry about that, Goff. I know you've got to go out and bake a cake, but it's tough. We're going to have a 10-minute break. So, Goff, anything you want to say now?
No, nothing to say. Very good. Thank you.
Thank you. What about you, Anne? Doing your nails? All right, then. Yeah, love it, Anne. Just play on your phone while you're talking to me. Right, go on, Pat. Anything from you?
Oh, thank you. It was lovely.
And we got Emma online still. She says, Anne, she really regrets not meeting you. Your battle axe. Right, Henry.
Just finding it very interesting.
Good.
Yeah.
I did send you I sent you a little message.
Oh, right. What, you've sent me an email, have you?
No. The chat.
Oh, we got to look at the little message. Hyde Fields, County Mail, at least 5,000 years old. CEIDE. So we can you get images of that online? I might bum into that in the break.
Cager. It's
Cager Fields. Got that in my head. I'll have a little look for you. See if I can get an image. Right, Richard.
No, nothing for me.
Right, okay then. 10-minute
Justin.
break, guys. It's going to be a short break tonight. So 8:24. I want to see you back.
Okay.
Okie dokie.
You
Does
okay?
anyone know?
Are
Does
you
anyone
okay?
know if
How's
you
your
got?
arm?
Hello?
How's your arm?
Oh, I had the plaster taken off today.
Yeah.
But it's very tender and bruised and
Yeah.
so I got exercises to do, but he said I gotta get it moving. But
Right.
it hurts.
Oh, yeah.
And he's giving me a splint.
Yeah, I got one of those. Yeah.
I don't know whether I'm supposed to wear it to bed to
Well,
protect.
yeah, if it hurts, wear it. If it doesn't hurt, don't wear it.
No.
Yeah, I just wear mine if my wrists are hurting. Yeah,
Oh, right. Well, it does hurt. Yes, my wrist.
supports it. Yeah.
Because I got 2 weeks to start moving it and getting it
Yeah.
back to normal.
Well,
But
that's a deal.
I put a load of cream on it because my hand's peeling. It's peeling. Oh, my arm is peeling. It was awful. But there we are.
Could be worse. Could be worse. Well, we found out today, Rich is going to have cataract surgery, the first one, Tuesday.
Oh,
And Richard,
oh,
I
right.
had both mine done, and now he's going to have both his done 2 weeks
Yeah.
apart.
Did you go to Portsmouth?
Oh yeah, I did. It was great. I did you go to the Anglesey trip? Did you do that trip?
No, I didn't. No.
I visited um two places that he'd taken us to. One was
Oh,
a
that's nice.
called,
I did go to Anglesey,
yeah,
Um, I stayed in Anglesey twice actually.
yeah, we did too. It's a couple days.
And it was in like a cottage,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah, we
near.
stayed in Port Madog and we had a little flat. It was upstairs and it was the tiniest flat. The kitchen was not as long as my arms.
Oh dear, the one we were in was like really.
A house.
It's like a big modern
Oh,
house, and it was
yeah,
in the middle of the country, but it was modern, and it
yeah.
had a swimming pool and a balcony, like one of those, places indoor, like inside. I've forgotten what they're called now. You got like a balcony
Go
going
somewhere.
round.
You want to go somewhere, have some coffee next week?
Pardon?
Want to go somewhere, have some coffee next?
Yeah, that would be nice. What day do you know?
I don't know.
I
No.
can't do Tuesday. I'm going to the dentist.
Okay.
Although, you can
Yeah.
always have a coffee after the dentist. But yeah, Tuesday's the dentist, that's all. I've
Where,
had loads of appointments this week.
yeah, where's your dentist?
My dentist in Brackler.
All right. Okay, good, good.
Yeah. And of course the thing is now I've got to get there. So I'll
Yeah,
probably walk, if it's dry.
yeah, might be.
Or I could go on the bus,
Hmm. Yeah,
I
what,
can't remember. Oh, it's in the afternoon. That's right. It's in the afternoon, about 3:15. So,
all right, okay.
um,
I'll look at my
but
schedule.
anyway, there's any day, like Wednesday, Friday,
Yeah,
Thursday, Friday. I don't know. What's the best day for you, Pat? Have a think about it, all right?
we'll get in touch, okay?
And we'll get in touch. I'm going to try and make a coffee.
Okay, me too, me too.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, oh, right, you're there. Come on, cat. You get my cat. See my cat. Cat.
Interesting, like, like two black eyes.
Well, well, yeah.
Aw, pretty cat.
Hello.
No,
He my Mally. He my Mally Mo. One man went to mow a meadow. One man went to mow. You know, yeah, from he's molting as well. Right. Anyway, let's crack on. Let's get straight down to it. And you don't have to talk a lot.
Well, I try, but I can't really. I'm just
What?
trying to find out if I should wear a splint to bed.
I think you should.
If you wake up and it hurts, put it on.
Yeah.
Well,
I
the
don't know.
thing is, you don't know what your hand's going to do in at night too.
Well,
If you go to sleep.
well, if I was lying next door to Michelle, I know exactly what my hands would do. But that's just me.
Yeah, I usually. Well, I've had a plaster on for 6 weeks.
Right, let's get straight to it, babes. Let's get
No,
let's get
I will wear it because it'll be more comfortable.
Good.
good. And I really wanted to know that. You know, it's all good. It's all good. It's all for the good of the country and the Third Reich. You know,
Well,
it's
I'm trying
all
to
good.
think of why this ring fort is or this Iron Age fort is empty. The only thing I can think is near the sea. It's near the sea. Well,
They sailed away.
Yeah.
Let's just move on. Anne, I told you you're not allowed to postulate on this one because it's too
All right.
complex.
All right. Okay. It could be practice.
I gotta be honest with you, Anne. Right, if you're anything like the caliber of your friends, right, who are so gullible, right, oh, hang on, what's going on?
I don't
No,
know.
no, I don't want that. Oh, right, I had the wrong thing on then.
Looks
All
like.
right, hang on. Right, okay. Oh God, I lost the plot. Right, okay. Back to this. Back to this. Right, okay. So what I want to do is spend the next little bit looking at these images, right? And then what we're going to do, we're going to try and get to. I got to find out how far I am away. We got to look at this. So we've got a few images to go, and I don't know if we're going to get there, but we're going to give it a good old stab. So let's just go back to here. So basically talking about ridge and furrow, when we're trying to examine these within the landscape, it's always good to get LiDAR or it's always good to get aerial photography. But as you can clearly see, this is quite an acute ridge and furrow. You can obviously see that this would be quite a big ridge and you've got quite a big furrow. Now, this is quite an excessive ridge and furrow. But the main thing is you can tell that's very clayey soil, and this would be in the conditions where it's very clayey, and you need to get a nice soil bank, and you just need to not have water stagnantly rolling around, right? You need to get a good crop, and you would just maintain that ridge every single year. And obviously any nutrients and any sort of phosphates or anything that are in the furrow, you can dig back onto the ridge, and this would be maintained generation after generation. Every generation blames the one before. So I just thought I'd go on to this little bit. This is Germany historic classification of ridge and furrow cultivation at selected locations in northern and central Germany using a multi-dating approach in historical sources. So it was good to look at another locality in Europe. And I think when people are examining ridge and furrows throughout the ages, it's been very useful to try and get an idea of the economy of the landscape, the agricultural economy of the landscape. So applying a multi-dating approach at ridge and furrows, because the problem is with ridge and furrows, we're not really going to get lots of dating evidence. In fact, it's going to be very rare if you get dating evidence in connection with ridge and furrows. So you're going to be very much reliant on if there's any carbonized evidence of carbonized seeds on them, which might be unlikely. There's not going to be much pottery. You might be able to look at maps and stuff, but the OSL, which is which might be looking at thermal luminescence dating, for example. So what you might do is that you would get the original, get rid of that, you'd get the original surface layer, right? And then what would happen to get an idea of when the ridge was created? This is how you're going to date dikes and banks, such as Devil's Dyke, such as Offa's Dyke, such as Watts Dyke, all those types of dikes. You're looking for this blue line, and what this is thermoluminescence dating, is the process to actually see the radiation which is trapped in the surface from the time that the ridge was actually created. Right, so the thermoluminescence is about understanding that moment in time, the last time that there was exposed to the sun. So that's the dating method which we're using to try and get an idea of the ridge. So what we've got lots of surveys and studies, for example, in Germany, dating results from ridge and furrow cultivation as early as the 600s in the Germanic landscape, all the way into the medieval period. Not often I see the term Middle Ages used in a modern paper. And then obviously we're thinking about ridge and furrow being something that might be used in more recent times as well. For example, one of the great myths about Germany is that it wasn't a massively industrial country. Between the wars, there's still a lot of agriculture about, and there were still some areas of Germany that used basic agricultural methods, and some of these ridge and furrow methods might have actually still been used as late as the 1930s. So just a little bit of information about this paper. So the ridge and furrow cultivation type of ancient agricultural technique, which is quite employed within Europe, and a topical thing that's been used and understood in Europe from very early times. As we're making the resolve when we're looking at this tonight within Britain, we're thinking about the Iron Age, and we're thinking comparing that with the medieval period, and it's talking about luminescence dating there, OSL, thermal luminescence dating. So just sort of basically going over to this, there's one thing that we can use to try and understand the agricultural landscape: abandoned villages. So in a British context, if we find abandoned villages in the middle of nowhere, they must have fed themselves somehow, and it's very likely that they had a mixed agriculture, so animal husbandry. So you've obviously got that grazing, and obviously you've got an arable ploughed landscape, so that we might not have evidence of the ridge and furrow or the selected Iron Age field systems that I've been talking about tonight, or the open medieval landscape of ridge and furrow. But by the very nature of having villages in the middle of nowhere would indicate cultivation, whether you've got the evidence or not. So obviously using these multiple approaches to examine the landscape is being used in Germany and Great Britain and elsewhere. So the difference between early ridge and furrow is the size of the ridges and the furrow. This is quite clear, and it's about management of the landscape as well. Now, the one thing, if you've got a small managed field which is within walls or banks and ditches, the ditch around it is going to create your drainage anyway, right? So your furrows don't need to be as acute as on the open landscape as it would be compared with a little area that's got a ditch around it. So you've got natural drainage if it's very clayey soils, for example. So you might think that in the Iron Age, your ridge might be maybe just centimeters above the surface, whereas in the medieval period, it's a meter above the ditch, the fall into the ditch. You could say that these ditches could be seen from a number of angles. The application of water, instead of dealing with well, the one thing that we don't lack of in parts of Britain is rain, right? For example, when we're going into the 1315 period in regards to leading all the way up to the plague in 13 into the 1350s, for example. One of the things that we can clearly think of is that there's a lot of water around. This is why our crops started to fail from the 1315 period onwards, because of the mini ice age, for example. But the one point to make is that when you're talking about adding water to the landscape, you're going to do it in drier places in Britain, like Lincolnshire or maybe Kent, for example, or other southern parts of Britain where the ditch might actually act for you to add water across the landscape. But this is not as acute if we talk about the Nile Delta. When you talk about the Nile Delta in regards to ancient Egypt, or you've got the Euphrates, or you've got the Tigris rivers, where the flooding of the landscape is offered onto channels, where the channels of water would be directed into the agricultural landscape, and the height of the ridge would be where you would plant your crop. So in the ditch, you're not going to flood your crop. So the one example tonight was to try and understand again a medieval ridge and furrow landscape. This is at Broughton, which is near the likes of York. Not Broughton as in regards to which is near Leicester, which I actually studied myself. But this is Broughton near York, and the one thing it's clear that what it is, this is rather interesting, that the modern landscape, for example, offers itself onto the medieval landscape, but we could tell that the later landscape has quite changed the landscape, because all of this here was all part of an extended medieval landscape that may have actually extended all the way over here. Right, so this would have been a huge medieval field, more or less all in one direction. But what's happened is the later landscape and the more modern landscape has altered what we're seeing with the medieval landscape. So in lots of the medieval landscape here, it seems to be going in varying different directions. Let's sort of draw the medieval landscape in a little bit here. So let's get my little thing. So get rid of that. So this is the direction of the plough this side. This is the direction of the plough this side. That's the direction of the plough this side. So this is the arrangement of the ridge and furrow in regards to the medieval landscape. Very, very open, without any of the trappings of a modern divided landscape or an even earlier Iron Age landscape. So you've got these little lanes in between these that divide the landscape for ease of transportation of goods in the medieval period. Again, it's very useful for me to give a differentiation between medieval ridge and furrow and Iron Age, so you can get that into your mind and sort of understand that. So again, the large, in comparison, again, the large, you can see a little bit there of the medieval stuff. Nothing's changed. It's remained the same, but obviously because of grazing of sheep and cattle there, it's never sort of, trees haven't really taken over the landscape, but it has in some areas. Just a quick little fact, a length, 220 odd yards, which is just under the length of a meter. Those would be the length of a furrow, and there would be parallel furrows going across the field. As you can see there, each one of these would be 220 yards long. And this would be in the medieval period. Ploughs at that time were pulled by teams of up to 8 oxen, which would have a heavy plough into the ground, which would then, then itself, you would have people on the land to try and attain the height of the ridges required in the medieval period for their ridge and furrow system. Just this little point here. So what we've got the furrow, we've got the ridge, and there you go. This is what's happening. So actually having it on the ridge means that you're able to get a really deep system of roots on that meter. And then you're going to get a very prosperous plant growth on that ridge. But it is quite restrictive because when you think about it, unlike a modern landscape where your ridge and furrows are quite narrow and it's basically you plow up the landscape and then you'd lay the seed and then you'd harrow it so it's flat. You've got the rows and rows of crops really tight together on a modern landscape, where the medieval landscape, there's a distance between each ridge. So it's not as intense as a modern landscape. It's quite a wasteful way of using your ploughed landscape. And to just give you a point about the medieval ridge and furrow, so the medieval ridge and furrow landscape is then also this type of landscape near York is also what you've got. There you go, boundary of the city of York there. What you've got, the medieval stuff on the left-hand side and the Napoleonic ridge and furrow on the right, which is on the right, it's using fairly more modern agricultural equipment, which is quite dangerous by the time you get to the 1800s, the Napoleonic period. It's said that one of the reasons why people worked down the mines in the 1800s was because of the new agricultural equipment was so dangerous that it was common to lose a whole arm whilst you went out farming, because the blades were so sharp, and that's why it was safer to work down the mines than it was to work on the land. Anyway, that's a really interesting point. So what we've got is constantly what they've got in, for example, in the Napoleonic period, the 1800s, what they've done is taken the early medieval landscape and they've flattened out all those earlier ridge and furrows and made a more acutely tighter ridge and furrow landscape in the 1800s rather than the medieval landscape. Again, comparing with the Iron Age landscape, where you get your nice little tight crops of fields where it's manageable, and again that gives you an idea of scale. With the difference is with the ridges and furrows, with the scale between the cattle grazing on the landscape. And there you go. That's a more regimented ridge and furrow, which is quite a desolate landscape when you think about it. Again, the point is if this 1800s landscape existed in the medieval in the Iron Age period, 2,000 years before, you can imagine that if this was all planted with crops and it was like I don't know, about a month old, my miniature flock of sheep, of 20 odd sheep, would decimate this landscape in a week. You'd lose your entire crop. So hence why my sheep that I've got, are Borere sheep, are exactly the same shape that they would have had in the Iron Age. Exactly the same. The pedigree is 6,000 years old. This is obviously an enclosed landscape is a sign that you've got sheep. End of. An open landscape, you don't have sheep. End of. That's fact. And again, going back to Hobmoor, which is near Yorkshire. So what I wanted us to do is just have a little couple of look at these images before we get to this, which are the field systems at Perth and Kinross, which is over north of Edinburgh. So let's get my little notes on my phone. The phone wants to see my face, and it's back on. So before we look at this Paleolithic landscape, what I want to do is look at these few slides here. Now, I've said, but I did actually say earlier on, I've said that most of the Iron Age landscape was enclosed in small little fields. But up there on the Scottish borders, there was an area that was open in the Iron Age. It was an open landscape in the Iron Age, simply because there weren't sheep around. They which is known as cord and rig agriculture, CORD, next word rig, rather than ridge and furrow, cord and rig. So there were open fields in some parts of Scotland because there were no sheep. But you can clearly see that compared to this guy here, and a little bit of a checkerboard here, where you've got them going in that direction and you've got them going in that direction. They're nothing like the medieval stuff, right? I know the distance in time is quite acute. However, these weren't very deep ridge and furrows. And there's one point about this, right? There's one very intriguing point, right? Ridge and furrow from the Iron Age surviving into the modern day and age. It was probably because it's been grazed upon by sheep ever since, and that's why no trees, and that's why nothing else has grown here. The landscape was abandoned. It was not good. The cultivation of the landscape failed sometime in the Iron Age, on the Scottish borders, which obviously that's where you've got Hadrian's Wall. And it's very interesting to remember. Oh, I made a point last night. I made a really good point, and this point as well. We'll see what it says here quickly. Obviously, Hambledon Hill, Dorset. You've got this. You know, we started off as a Neolithic site, as we're talking about lots of these sites like the one at Warham in Norfolk, and we basically mentioned we in regards to lots of hill forts in Britain, 5,000 of them. What would usually happen is grazing around the landscape. You would have grazing around the landscape in the Iron Age. You've got these little enclosed fields. You've got all your animals and so on. They're moving around and stuff. And you might think, for example, that hill forts were places that animals would be able to be kept out from grazing. In fact, hill forts would be ideal to graze. Can you see what I just did then? Warham might actually just be a large field that people planted crops. That's all it may have been. Norfolk is quite boggy. Norfolk is the type of landscape that is going to be very difficult to grow things because it can get flooded quite easy. Warham itself would be perfect to plant crops. Just an idea, folks. Just an idea, folks. But it makes a lot of sense because the value of planting crops within this area of a hill fort is that it's not going to be grazed upon by animals. But then again, we've got evidence that people are using these large landscapes to store grain and to keep small animals and to keep animals grazing, and they're not planting stuff there at all. However, folks, in the Roman era, coming into your 50s, your 60s, 70s, by around AD 100, all the hill forts in the Vale of Glamorgan, Colehere Bay, Bulwarks, Summerhouse Point, Llancarvan, all these locations, what we see is the Romans coming in. A best example of this is Caerdydd, which is outside Cowbridge. That's the best example where what we've got 1 minute we've got an Iron Age landscape, and the next minute the Romans come in and they say, right, it's just going to be one big farm. It's perfect for farming. You've got this rich soil which has got generations of people living here, their shit and animals and all the rest of it. It's all in the ground. You plow it all up, perfect for agriculture, right? And this is what we're saying with Caerdydd. That's fact. We know that they were small little farmstead at Caerdydd when formerly in the Iron Age it had been a really populous place to keep grain. It's used for agriculture. It's used just for ploughing, farming. Maiden Castle is probably the same. Hambledon Hill. So the point I've made with the Iron Age is that these are massive sort of defended areas to plant grain isn't too far away from reality, because that's what exactly the Romans are using these things for. They may have been used in some locations to plant special grain in the past. It's just an idea. And there is one other thing that I pointed here. If the banks themselves, say Hambledon Hill, if the banks themselves, now just think about this. This is huge. This is over a kilometre. The banks themselves, you've got multiple banks. Do you imagine if you planted a crop on the top of this bank, right? Instead of having the palisade had just disintegrated, disappeared, you planted a crop around it, right? Perfect. Nobody's going to be able to graze it because the sheep are on the outside banks and ditches and they're stopped from coming in. An idea again, but it's perfect. Do you know how I plant my crops in West Wales? On a bank. That's how I do it, and I do it without thinking, but I do it. Now, so I don't know what you just said, Anne, but what?
Good drainage.
Good drainage. Exactly. Do you know in West Wales, right? Talking in a Valley's accent in West Wales. We in our soil is actually our ground itself is actually it's It's just shale. It's just gravel, right? So we've got a layer of soil which is about a foot thick, and then you've got layers upon layers of shale and gravel. It's perfectly drained, right? So we've got a greenhouse in the ground, right? And it don't flood. And you know the sheep love the other greenhouse, right? They just dive in the greenhouse when it's wet, and they're not going to get flooded out because it just drains away. Anyway, Mungraved Mungridsdale Common, Cumbria. Right, and I've got to try and get this next bit done because otherwise, no interruptions. Now the next bit done because we're going to be behind the other class on Tuesday, which won't do. So Mungrisdale Common, Cumbria, the quality and character of rough common grazing on extensive upland pasture like these has deliberately been maintained. And basically, what they've done is they've just used it for grazing. So when the rich soils have been denuded by the farming using Iron Age ploughing methods, and all the rich soils have been washed down the hill, and you've got the little lynchets creating little banks. The soil washes down the hill. Lynchets are little sort of lips on along the hill. So you'd have these little. Hang on a minute. Start again. As the hill floats down, you'd have these little banks, which is basically where all the soil is crept, well, all the rich soil. So what they're doing is keeping the rough pasture, which is keeping the soil there, right? And usually peat is forming as well, but they've got animals grazing over it. So this is how they're keeping the soil intact, and you've got your brambles and your brackens being kept at bay. And again, looking. I didn't really do much with this last night, but basically you can see that this is again hugely different from the Iron Age landscape. But there's one point to be made with this, right? Can you see how long these furrows are? They're endless. You can see one point is that even after the ridge and furrow system landscape was abandoned here 600 years ago, or maybe 500 years ago, at least after the end of the plague. In 1350. So when we're looking at this, the trees haven't really taken over. There's a few trees there, but they haven't really taken over. So in other words, this has been used for pastoral grazing by sheep and cattle for the past 500 or 600 years. Otherwise, it had been taken over by trees. Do you see the point? It's just been grazed over by sheep, which would actually, it should be good soil now to plough, because the amount of shit that's built up on the landscape, the amount of phosphates on the landscape will make it perfect for ploughing, but we don't need that type of agriculture anymore. Now, we're in Scotland, and I need to take a slurp of my drink. We're in Scotland. We're in the heart of good old Scotland, and what we need to say is that fields and soils, paleo-environmental data leave little doubt that arable agriculture was pursued extensively throughout the Iron Age in Scotland. Now, there's an important point to be made here, and remind me about Agricola in a little while. Variously witnessed by they've done lots of core samples across the landscape, and what you can see is all these small fields. You can see the round houses and stuff, divisions of small fields. You can actually see from this high resolution shot, you can actually see Iron Age field systems where you've got it gridded, all being ploughed in one direction, right, within these small fields, right, which is great within the area of Perth and Kinross. So the one thing to be said about this very entertaining landscape is that in southern Scotland, you've got some open landscape, and towards the middle part of Scotland, Edinburgh and Glasgow, and north of that, all the way through to the Grampians, you've got field systems like this. Identifying the fields from the Iron Age have been done and derived by using augured soil samples, augering into the ground to get the pollen. This has been challenging because this is a large upland area, and there's been some mucking around, and there's been some changing by the likes of the Roman era landscape. Now, there's a point to be made here, and I'm going to make my point about Agricola. The prehistorian Stuart Pigott, who also excavated at Sutton Hoo, right? He's the one who took all the credit from Basil Brown, the original finder of the Sutton Hoo burial. Stuart Pigott in 1958 referred to this upland area in Scotland as a landscape that was for the Celtic cowboys, but it's not a Celtic cowboy landscape where they're cutting down the old trees and they're planting the landscape. It's now massive in the Iron Age that you've got this landscape of agriculture, right? This enduring landscape of agriculture. And there's one point to be made. This is at Drum Turn. There's one important point to be made. By me telling you this, all those films about the Romans going into Scotland, i.e. the Ninth Legion disappearing in the Grampian forests, is a total and utter load of codswallop. And the reason why is that large tracts of the Grampian forest did not exist at the time of the Romans. It was agricultural landscapes. And the point is, to have the Romans marching into Scotland and to get lost in forests that didn't exist is, again, nonsense. But it was possible now that we're starting to understand Scotland better. It was a very harsh agricultural landscape in Scotland, and it was not really good for Roman settlers to go into Scotland, because this is clear. The evidence is clear from just this one image that if you're planting in these small field areas, right, it means that you're desperate to try and have your crop protected from the winds. You're desperate to have them protected from grazing animals, which would not adhere to Roman practices of organized landscapes. By the yardstick of Celtic field systems, which have created an expectation of field is a small plot of a quarter of an acre or so, bounded by lynchets and bulks or reeve systems with walls and banks taken in huge blocks of countryside, the Scottish field system has always seemed incoherent to modern eyes and disorganized, as it would have been to the Romans. Basically, these banks and ditches to keep the soil in, to make sure on small slopes and sort of areas. Remember, Scotland is quite hilly, like West Wales. And when you get your winds up, you need those banks and ditches to actually keep everything within the Scottish field system disorganized. Textbook clutches of hut circles and fields. So what we're saying is this dominates the Scottish landscape underneath lots of those trees. But over time, we're talking about massive changes within Scotland. In the Bronze Age, there was a lot more cultivation and clearance. So here we go. So we've got hut circle groups in Highland Scotland, and the mainly Bronze Age in date abandoned at the end of around 1,000 years BC. And then people are starting to move in to try and do what else they could do with the landscape in routinely disorganized field system landscapes, which is very different from what's going on in southern Scotland. As we know, we've got open systems, but we've got lots of grazing sheep and stuff. It's haphazard but it's haphazard in line with the topographical nature of the landscape. There's a little bit of a trace here. This is back to the Scottish borders at Hutno, which is very different from these upland areas. You can see the little minute traces of the ridge and furrow or the cord and rig systems that were associated with these upland areas. Cumulatively, through time, the ongoing process of successive cultivation consumes its own history. And while relatively deep settlements may have accumulated as a result of this history, trapped against an undisturbed bank or bulk or various other things, what we can see is the field soils are getting very much denuded by using this system of agriculture. And the other thing as well is if you just having everything in one area, and you're exhausting the landscape, you're exhausting the soil within those small squares within that small agricultural landscape, and that overrides the ability for people to live within this landscape, the cord and rig method, for too long. So this is what my notes specifically say. It says the cord and rig system of agriculture in Scotland was not the solution, and the Romans probably saw this as bits of this landscape were abandoned. In other words, what we're talking about is the plots that these people had were little more than gardens, probably not enough for them to survive upon. And obviously, things would have changed quite dramatically. What is going on in Scotland uh, is what we see the reverse of in the likes of South America. So what we talk about the terra petra in South America with the Amazon basin. What we do know now is that the most of the Amazon basin was without trees 1,000 years ago, right? And there were civilizations across all of it, and then the trees took over again. The lesson of the Amazon basin is that people would build things, and then years later they would just abandon them for Mother Nature to take over, and then they would build somewhere else in another locality. In Scotland, people kept intensively working the soil week in, week out, year after year after year. And then that would mean that the rich fertilized soils that you require for growing would not be maintained. So understanding this system, understanding what's going on in Scotland, understanding the terraces, understanding the rich agriculture, is very mixed across Britain. But knowing this, that we do know enough about the Iron Age agricultural system to know that things were intense. They needed to keep what they had secure and safe, and they weren't able to go into the local Asda, not Asda, the local food mart to get bags of grain. Whatever grain they grew one year, they needed to have an excess to grow the following year, and if there was no excess, you couldn't plant anymore, and landscapes started to be abandoned. It's very, very harsh in this part of Scotland, as it's very, very harsh in West Wales. And one thing I do know is that probably won't be living in this building this time next year, because it's so bloody cold and the winds, and I'm getting older. But that's something I've learned. But I know from the harsh realities of living in an upland way that these people in the Iron Age would have had it harder than me. And then eventually these field systems would have been abandoned in Scotland and Ireland. And the last thing I'm going to mention is that obviously what I wanted to do was look at the Rhondda Valley this week, but we're not going to do that. We'll do that next week. So all the images, look at all these images that we didn't do tonight. We didn't do about 20 odd images. And this is that place in Ireland, right? So, Henry, can you come in on this and tell us a little bit about this before we finish?
Yeah, if I got it right, it's the oldest walled field system discovered today in the world.
Of 5,000 years old.
Well, I think they're even going up to 6,000 now, and it goes back.
How dare you? That's bloody old. Yeah, that is old.
Yeah.
That is the one thing that I'm finding with these classes is that there's been black holes in admittedly there's been black holes in bits of my teaching, so we should have done a lot more agriculture in earlier periods, and we should have done sort of some more charcoal burning stuff in other periods and stuff. But it's only when you get to the Iron Age where all the stuff comes to fruition that you can go back and retrace some of these little steps, which I'm really grateful for us doing. And I would like to say as well, my fourth penneth on this, you're probably looking at some of the features on that image are likely to do with peat cutting as well.
Yeah, undoubtedly. And I think that's how they discovered the walls, actually, through peat cutting.
Yes. No, well, there's the link. There is the exact link, exactly. So my God, that would be annoying, wouldn't it? There's a nice bit of peat. We're going to get this nice black peat layer, and you've got a bloody wall. Yeah, I can see that now. So I'm really right. Anyway, thanks for giving offering that to us tonight, Henry. So thank you. Right, so what we're going to do, we're going to stop sharing now. And I've oh my God, look at that. It's dark.
And
It's dark. I need a light.
7 minutes past 9.
I know. We'll have a few questions. Don't worry. Michelle will be okay. She'll probably she'll be lusting after me. So there you go. Right. So she's only small. Michelle's lust levels are quite big. Right. So right. Okay. Goff, anything that you want to say?
No questions. They're very well explained. Thanks very much.
My pleasure. There was a lot in that tonight, and if there was too much in that tonight, I just wanted to fill a lot in it. So thank you very much. That sentiment is very much held. Thank you for that. What about you, Richard?
No, interesting subject. Nothing really to ask about.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. Listen to my crude song that I put on YouTube, even though I can't remember the lyrics. Anne.
Oh yeah, it's interesting because it is. I can't remember now why.
How this is somebody needs to say some other words. Right, okay. Anyway, thanks for that, Anne.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
There was something I wanted to say, but I forgot now.
Okay, I was just going to grab my black cat and he just moved. Right, so okay.
Yeah,
Right, Michelle said if I ever died, should be surrounded with cats. Right, Henry, anything you want to say?
No, I thought it was a very interesting subject. I think it was intriguing that pointed out the different field systems, even just across the British Isles.
yeah.
In the
Obviously,
same
the
time
difference.
frame.
Yeah. Yeah.
But hang on, let him finish, Anne.
No, that was it. It was just, having that extra bit of knowledge is great.
My pleasure. My pleasure. I'm glad I've managed to put a fair bit into it tonight. Thank you. So anyway, thank you for that, Henry. And Henry, meet the black cat.
Pretty.
Hello, Black Cat.
This one's called Morgoth. He's the Dark Lord.
And I just thought it was a shame about the land clearance, but that was a bit later, wasn't it?
Yeah. Oh, well, it's always a shame about the land clearance. That's just abominable. That's just yeah. That's abominable. Anyway, thanks for that, Henry. Anything you want to say, Pat?
The 6,000-year-old landscape with the farming landscape. Where was it? Was it north of something other in Scotland?
County Mayo.
County Mayo.
In Ireland.
Hang on, let him talk. Go on, Henry.
Yeah, it's County Mayo in Ireland.
Okay.
And it's something called KD Fields. It's a CEIDI, and Henry's going to say it the right way.
Reagan.
Yeah.
Oh. Okay, thank you.
Totally different. Right, okay, that's been an absolute delight tonight, and I'm going to call it a day. I got to lock all my animals away, and I got to jump in the car, so that's fine. So if there's nothing else anyone wants to say, looking forward to next week, and that's been a blast. So thank you. Thanks for your support. So thank you, Henry. Thank you, Goff. Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Anne and Pat and anyone else online.
Okay.
And thanks for everybody's contributions. Night, folks.
All have a good night. Good night.
So long.
Night, folks. Night.
Be in touch next week.
Yeah, make sure you are. Yeah, make sure Goff goes with you.
Right.
Goff. Oh yeah, Goff. You could come to the
Goff.
pictures.
Good night.
Yeah. And he's paying. Anyway, night, guys.
Good night.
What?
Good night.
Night. I can't get this thing stand up, I can't get this thing stand up. Right, so okay, so anyway, it's been great to have you on, Al and the Dodgy Git, and Emma and I'm going to say goodnight to you guys. Don't forget, everybody, like and subscribe. Anyone who wants to join, the join button is £1.99 a month, and that really helps. Lots of expenses going out now with the animals and the buildings and all the rest of it, and trying to keep everything going. So, night, guys. I'm just going to read in the. Anyone can talk about anything, but I'm just going to look in the chat box again. See if there's anything. Right, this place in Ireland is called Keddy Fields. Right, it's. I'll write out the message. There's one message from Henry on here. Henry to me, direct message. And it says as follows: 1, 2, 3. Keddy Fields, Ceide. That's Ceide. Fields, County Mayo, at least 5,000 years old. The field system there. Really appreciate that from Henry. That was a nice little bit of end today. I'll share that with everybody on Tuesday next week. So nothing else on that window with the Cade Fields. Can't even spell it right. Cade Fields. I'll just go check on that. Nothing on that window. Back to the Cade Fields window. Back to Cade Fields. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Nos da. Diolch yn fawr i chi. Night, everybody.